for a podcast?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that ASC thing was great, and Ian's lovely. I'm hoping we can do something else for the next Schrader film, The Card Counter.
Is that the one with, is it Oscar Isaac that's in it?
That's the Oscar Isaac one, yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Is that next year that's coming?
That's done, yeah, that's coming out. That'll be out on September 10th, or around September 10th in the US. I don't know what the UK
it's a little bit later, yeah.
Maybe, yeah.
So did you shoot that pre-COVID?
We shot that pre and during COVID. We started in March of 2020. Is that right? No, 2021, sorry. We started in March of 2021 and then got 3 weeks in and then got shut down and then returned for a sort of week and a half, 2 weeks in August of 2021. Oh, no, that would have been 2020. Sorry.
Yeah, you're right the first time. Yeah, 2020.
Yeah, 2020, yeah.
Was it quite a different atmosphere on set for each half of that?
Oh, yeah, it was completely different. I mean, I think Paul had this apparition sort of early in the process. We were shooting in Biloxi, Mississippi. And he had this apparition early in the process, was saying, I don't think I'm going to get to finish this film. And I was like, what, are you crazy? It's like, this COVID thing is far away. But, little did we know it was already here, and it was already going to pretty much transform the way the film industry functions. Yeah, it was significantly different. Also significant because I had to replace the majority of my crew to come and finish the movie. Because most of the people came from New York. And the sort of travel down there was kind of quite impossible or full of many hoops to jump through, ended up driving actually. If you ever, need a really long road trip, go from New York to Mississippi.
How did you find that then? Because I imagine when you start a shoot, there's maybe 1 or 2 days where you're kind of getting into the swing of things. Does that almost happen again once you have that new crew on board? Yeah, I mean,
it's very true. The hardest thing, one of the hardest things aside from, the sort of impending doom of COVID and all that was the idea as we were leaving that, I knew every single shot of that movie and that there was sort of a very real possibility that I wouldn't get to complete it. Or it would not be completed because in those early COVID days, certainly we were just thinking, is there going to be a film industry? Are people going to be able to gather and make work together? Or is the future of this world completely remote? And how would that function for someone like me whose life is making things with a group of people on a set?
Were you thinking that like long term, a few years, or were you thinking that forever?
I don't know. You just didn't know. It got, especially here in New York, it got so bad here. We had so many deaths and, refrigerator trucks full of bodies and, all that. A lot of people lost loved ones, myself included. And you just didn't know what was going to happen. Didn't seem like there was so many rays of lights out of this darkness, in April and May and June of 2020.
Yeah, if you were shooting The Card Counter in March, did you almost travel back to New York as you were like going into the epicenter of it?
Yeah, completely. I remember stopping at different supermarkets in like Virginia and loading up on food because my girlfriend was texting me and saying, oh, hey, there's no this, or there's no that, or that's all off the shelves, or there's no bread, or, whatever it may be. It got really, really bad here. And we just didn't know, at that point, we didn't know, was it airborne? How did you get it? We just knew it was bad. And
panic.
Just panic everywhere. After you stop thinking about you and your family's safety, you start to think about the things that define you. And certainly work is something that defines a lot of people and defines me. And starting to think about what would happen with that. Did I need to find a new profession? I don't know what I would do, but definitely had to think about it.
How much of your self-worth do you think comes from your work?
I think a pretty significant part for people in the creative industry of their self-worth comes from what they do and feeling good at what you do. I think it's very hard when it's, bound up. Your creative endeavors is bound up with your financial gain, and the losses feel more substantial and the wins feel great. I've got lots of friends that just have, jobs they go to and they love the outdoors and that's their passion, and, that job so they can have money to take off time to go and hike or do whatever it is that really fulfills them. My creative passion and my work and my hobby are all bound up in one thing. Makes for a bit more of a stressful life, but I kind of signed up for that, getting into the film industry. But yeah, you just, I think over time, hopefully you find coping mechanisms.
What exactly would those coping mechanisms be?
I think it's more just mental. To feel as though a rejection is not a rejection of your self-worth, but just a rejection of, that wasn't right for you weren't right for that project,
Yeah, there's a million different reasons why that could be.
Yeah, exactly. But I think these ups and downs affect anyone in the creative industries.
Is there anywhere in your life that you're able to be creative without those kind of hang-ups?
What do you mean?
Like that kind of pressure of it all being wrapped up in the financial thing. Are you able to just still go out with a camera and kind of have that be a free space for you?
Yeah, I mean, I just find it in other things. It doesn't need to be like related. For me, it's actually better if it's not related to my cinematography work. I still get a lot of joy through my cinematography work and a lot of self-fulfillment, or fulfillment, I should say. So I don't find that I'm necessarily needing that outlet that's related to cinematography, whether it be photography or whatever it may be. I just like, going for a run, or I really enjoy surfing, going for a surf, all these things sort of like free my mind and free me in a lot of ways.
Do you go up to Long Island? Is that where you surf in New York?
Yeah, we have Long Island, we have Rockaway, we have New Jersey. It's not the best surf, but it's fun to get in the water.
It's funny because you don't think of New York being a coastal town, but it's kind of right on the edge.
Yeah, I think many people don't think that. Many people think, oh, you have waves in New York? But yeah, I mean, we are on the Atlantic Ocean. New York probably is the least kind to its waterways. I mean, we build highways along the ocean instead of, giving it a place for people to live. But yeah, that's not what we're known for. But yeah, I mean, it's just good getting into nature, whatever that may be, and sort of clearing the mind.
Can you do that if you're shooting a film in a kind of natural space? Do you notice a difference in atmosphere compared to being inside a room when you're shooting a film?
I don't think so. Not really. I mean, ultimately, work, when you're at work, it's work, right? Even if it's the best scenario possible. You still have a level of professionalism. You still have some things that you want to accomplish, a goal as a team. So I think it's hard to separate that. I've had great jobs, amazing jobs, commercials and movies and all that sort of stuff. But it's ultimately still work. It's still kind of in a different category in your brain than going and spending a day hiking through a beautiful forest.
You're on a very tight schedule as well.
Yeah. I mean, the reality of that is always, it's always a ticking clock on everything. Part of the pride that I think a lot of people take in their work and that I take in my work is in making my days, is in finding, figuring out the rubric successfully,
We mentioned, or we kind of touched upon, we started off with the card counter a little bit. Mm-hmm. That's the third time you've worked with Schrader?
That is, yeah.
Third, yeah. Do you develop a shorthand working with a director on multiple occasions? How does communicating kind of differ?
Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, it's. I think this is true of any professional relationship, or really any relationship. It could be a friend. You just develop a knowledge of, we do that, we don't do that. We go to the park on Sundays, or we don't go to the park on Sundays. And I think that's even more true when, it's the relationship between a director and a DP, especially because I think that Dog Eat Dog, we were trying a lot of different things out. I think that's a movie of a lot of different moods. First Reformed was something very different and something that had a much more coherent perspective. And so based on that, then, you have this shorthand of two things that you can point to, and you can say, oh, well, this movie we did that, on that movie we did this, which kind of movie is this? And so it makes what can often be a very short prep time be okay, because you're not starting language from zero, you're starting language from 20 or 30. You've seen a lot of the same movies, you like a lot of the same stuff, so all that helps.
You did Dog Eat Dog and then First Reformed, right?
Yeah, Dog Eat Dog, then First Reformed, and then The Card Counter.
It's funny because what you're saying there about, Dog Eat Dog, you're kind of experimenting a lot, and First Reformed was quite locked in place. You would almost imagine them being the other way around. Like the first time collaborating, it would make sense to have it be the one that's kind of quite tied down. And then the second time you kind of get a bit more loosey-goosey.
Maybe. I think it all is based on story, though. Dog Eat Dog is a pitch black comedy. Well, that's what Paul thinks. And sort of gonzo in its story and its structure and the characters that are in it. And First Reformed is very meditative, focused film with some more sort of ethereal elements, but generally speaking, the mood is very somber.
Dog Eat Dog, you were kind of finding the tone a little bit on set, right? Or it was developing on set?
Yeah, definitely.
How does that impact you as a cinematographer? Does your idea of what you want to do with it change a little bit as a result of that?
Of course. I mean, I think there are lots of ways to approach movie making. And I think in those two films, you have the sort of polar opposites of how you approach movie making. One is you have these great actors, you sort of rehearse it and see what they want to do. And then, you respond not on the fly because you have a general idea beforehand of what's going to happen, but you sort of do respond on the fly, and you say, okay, well, you need this shot, you need this reverse, you need this, and you think on your feet. And First Reformed, every shot of that movie is planned out. Every shot has been storyboarded, not storyboarded, but shot listed in some manner. And so, that's an instance of saying to an actor, as Paul would say, well, you're going to start here and then you're going to go there. And then this is the edge of the frame. And, those are decisions that you make when you don't move the camera, or you move the camera very few times. So I think you have sort of two examples of different styles of movie making, and neither is better. They're just different because they reflect the stories and the script.
When it comes to First Reform being so meticulously planned as well, are you still able to find places on set for that spontaneity to kind of occur that was so prevalent in Dog Eat Dog?
Yeah, totally. I mean, I think when you set yourself rules, it's a great joy to break them. And so there are moments in that film where we had planned to have a locked off camera, and then Paul would say, well, let's move the camera here. And I'd be like, well, Paul, we don't do that. And be like, let's break a rule, and I think you have to be open to those things. You have to be open to some of the magic of what you see on set, of what can be created. Otherwise, if you're not adapting, I think you fail at the whole game of filmmaking. The game of filmmaking is to make something that you're proud of within the time frame that you're proud of, but that fulfills the story.
Why would you break a rule? What would motivate you to do that?
I don't know. You get to a location and it's something different than you thought about, and it's better a different way. I think that's when we started to break rules in First Reformed. We had this great bush, like weird bush in front of the house that was sort of ominous in some way, and the sun was setting in a really nice direction, and hey, wouldn't it be nice to track with them from the door of the house to the garage? Wouldn't that tell the story in a better way?
How quick can you set that up and kind of get it ready to go like that if the sun's setting?
Well, I mean, you don't do it on every shot, and especially when you're making a small movie that's kind of a sprint to get everything in.
What was the shoot time on that?
That movie we shot in 23 days.
Man, that's tight.
Yeah, for sure. Most of Paul's films are under 25 days. Or I should say that the three films that I've shot with Paul have been under 25 days. When you either plan meticulously or have great actors, I think you're rewarded in both ways.
When did the industry start to shift to that? Because it's not always been that tight, has it? I mean, I feel like you used to kind of have like 40 days shoots would be the minimum.
Yeah. I mean, it's basically with the advent of digital and with the fact that the film business has changed so much. And Paul will talk about this, he's talked about this extensively, but, when he started, 35 days was sort of the minimum. And you had film, which you had to expose, right? And it's not as light sensitive as digital cameras. And you can only do so much in a day, And as a result, that was sort of the model. But now so much of what we do is dictated by the market and dictated by the fact that such and such actor could only sell for so much money, and they're only going to garner so much money, and you need this other actor to add additional money. And when it comes down to it, filmmaking is very expensive, and the margin of making it to selling it is very thin. As a result, the industry has really shifted, and making a sub $5 million movie in less than 20 days has become much more of the norm than it was, say, 15 or 20 years ago.
Where was it when you came into the business? Was that transition already quite far along, or was it kind of in the process?
Yeah, I mean, I spent my earlier years in anthropology, doing documentary films and shooting more commercials. So by the time I started doing narrative projects, we were very solidly within the sort of digital era. I mean, I shot Dog Eat Dog on a Red, which was the last time I used a Red. I'm sorry, Red. But I think that that Red was an earlier digital camera, but still really great.
When you say anthropology films, like documentaries that are character studies, or what sort of thing do you mean?
I mean, like documentary anthropology, following people who are making things, process-based films that, show how someone goes about doing something. That was sort of my first life, and where I sort of started falling in love with filmmaking, and I was sort of jack of all trades. Had this little, Panasonic DV cam, an audio mic on top of it. And, I was sort of doing it all, editing it at night, just sort of a one-man band.
Kind of like a fly on the wall.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, not really interfering, not dictating that much, just using sort of what's naturally there and who is naturally there in space. So, watching someone build a rope for a day, or build a ladder, or dye some indigo. Those were all things that I was interested in recording and interested in making films about.
Did anything from that aid you in First Reform, though? Because the whole thing about transcendental filmmaking is kind of, keeping out of the way a little bit.
I don't know. I mean, I think transcendental filmmaking is more how do you use the camera to allow your audience to lean in and create their own versions of a film in their head. I don't necessarily think it's about non-action.
I guess when I say keeping out of the way, I kind of mean keeping out of the way of the audiences. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I see what you're saying. Yeah. I thought you meant like how crafted are these films? How crafted are transcendental films?
Well, they sometimes feel more crafted than a kind of regular film because there's so much thought that goes into allowing the audience to perceive it in quite an open way.
Yeah. I think you're definitely right on there. Yeah, I mean, I guess in a lot of ways there is a meditative quality to the sort of process films that I started making or that I was interested in making.
Was it always your intention to come around to narrative at some point?
It was my intention as it became my intention. Yeah, I mean, I was always interested in movies. I always loved movies, but I didn't know that I would make them or be a part of making them until I was well into shooting commercials and finding that while commercials were a lovely way to make a living, I wasn't necessarily pushing myself and feeling creatively fulfilled.
How long had you been shooting commercials for before you came to that realization?
Probably about 10 years. I mean, it was sort of a long time coming. It had been an opportunity that I'd want to do, maybe 5 years into that 10-year process, wanting to do more narrative work. but it wasn't till another 5 years past that I was sort of, I got the opportunity.
So are you making the anthropological films alongside the commercials, or are they before that?
No. So, I mean, I started in college studying under this incredible guy named Ako Schuster, this Hungarian documentary anthropologist who worked with Robert Gardner in the 70s at Harvard, doing documentary anthropology work. They made some absolutely beautiful films. And I was really influenced by him. And so when I graduated, I was lucky enough to get a Fulbright grant. And I moved to India, used the grant to basically, buy a camera and get all the sort of things that I needed, and start making documentaries there. And I lived there making various different documentaries. And a friend of mine from Glasgow, actually, when the grant was over, said, "Oh, I've got another friend who is really into documentaries too. Will you come and meet him? He wants to make a documentary." I said, "Yeah, of course." And we met and got along, and I ended up moving to London as a result of that, and working alongside him. The short story version of that is that another friend of a friend asked us to start doing some stuff for Burberry, the clothing brand. We stopped doing any documentaries and just did work for Burberry, and that sort of started my commercial life, because I had basically been shooting as this documentarian for the years previous to that. I was, this jack of all trades. I could shoot, I could edit, and this was around the time that the 5D and the 7D became accessible and popular ways to shoot. We just started shooting on those, making little documentaries of like how a scarf is made, in Italy for Burberry or another company. And it was incredible training, because I got to do everything. I got to shoot, and I got to edit my own stuff as I was doing, and I got to produce, and I just learned a lot about how to make films. And I found out through that whole process that, hey, I really like just shooting the movies, being involved with the camera. And so when I eventually moved back to New York, I had this kind of commercial reel of stuff. And while I still did some documentary shooting, a few days here, a few days there, I did, work on various different documentaries. I primarily just kind of dove into doing commercials.
It's a very natural progression when you put it that way, how you went from those anthropological films into almost, would you call those Burberry videos like anthropological commercials, like kind of looking at how a scarf was made?
Yeah, I mean, in a lot of ways, yes. This sort of how-tos element of that was, here I was recording how someone in Jaipur, India dyes indigo, and now I'm in Lake Como recording how someone makes a scarf. Obviously they're different contexts, but the tools are the same.
How long were you in London for?
I was in London for about 5 years.
So when you went back to shoot After Love, was that the first time you've been back since then?
No, I've been back for commercials and that kind of stuff. I'd worked there quite a lot, but this was the first time that I'd been back for like a long stretch, and I was sort of staying pretty close to where I lived in Stoke Newington. Yeah, I mean, it was great. It really felt like I was coming full circle. A completely different person, a completely different DP, rid of whatever the mistakes I had made at that time.
Do those changes become more apparent within yourself when you go back to that place?
Yeah, sure. I mean, they definitely. Yeah, I think when you're in a place and then you return to it, and you sort of change as a person, and your professional life has changed as a person, but say, the street you used to live on is still there, you can't help but reflecting that time has passed and things have changed and you feel a different way. Running along the canal, was just like a weird full circle thing, living and going back to be in Dalston, and eating at the Turkish place that I used to go get a soup at. All these things, you just can't help but feeling some level of nostalgia, but at the same time some level of fulfillment for being at a completely different point in your life. I hope that I'll be able to return to London and do another movie in a few years' time, and have that go through that same process, maybe not as significant, but from 0 to 100, but have some level of knowledge that, it's been 4 years since I was here last, and these shops are still here, and yet I have changed and I am a different person,
Like a Richard Linklater film, just checking in with some characters every 3 or 4 years or whatever.
Yeah, except unfortunately, like very few of my friends still live in London. Everyone is moved to their country place, or moved back to Edinburgh or wherever it may be. Everyone is seemingly
escaped the city.
Escaped the grimy city. Yeah, exactly. There are only really a few left.
We were touching upon, a lot of the commercial work you did there too. Is there any parallel between that and Billions? Where in commercials you have that established brand, and in Billions you have the established series when you come on to shoot an episode?
Not really. Yeah, commercials are just great little exercises, and they're more dependent upon who the director is and what their vision is. Whereas the series is returning to a look that is pre-established.
Do you quite enjoy going into a commercial soon after you've done a feature?
I do. Yeah, it sort of wakes me up from the sort of mindset I'm in. When I go into a feature, I really get into this sort of like monk-like thing where I won't really watch other movies aside from the reference movies that the director and I have been talking about. I'm really much more focused, on what I'm making. And so to go and do a commercial that has a lot of color and potentially is just great. It just sort of like, you feel like all your creative ideas are coming back and being sparked. And, I remember when I was on First Reformed, a good friend of mine asked me if I wanted to go see like 2001, a beautiful film print of 2001. And I just said, God, I'd love to, but I just can't. Like I'm shooting this, 1:3:3 movie. I can't 4:3, aspect ratio. I can't go see something widescreen. Like my brain just can't sort of take that change, So to come back and do a commercial is just great.
Especially the scope of something like 2001 when you compare that to the intimacy of First Reformed.
Yeah. They're very different films. I don't know if they're comparable.
How many reference films would you typically watch when you're working on a picture?
It depends. I mean, sometimes you go in and someone has a very defined idea of what they want, but at least 20 films per movie. So I think, when you start a movie with someone, especially who you've never worked with before, all you really have as a shared knowledge is references. And so I think it's really important to start to pull different things and get excited about different things and create something that, borrows and steals from lots of other things. And then you're on set and you find your own language, and that sort of all contributes and creates something new and interesting, hopefully. Or maybe that's not the point. The point is to do something that is very referential or, of a certain project, and you try to make that your own, and, that's where you go.
There was one actually particular shot in First Reformed I wanted to nerd out on a little bit and ask about, where
Sure. I shot that film in 2017, so it's been a minute.
It was the shot where he pours, I think it's like bleach into the whiskey, but halfway through the film, and it kind of starts to just like dissolve. Was that a reference to Godard in 2 or 3 Things?
No, it's a reference to Taxi Driver, actually. To when De Niro is in the all-night diner and he puts the Pepto-Bismol in the cup.
I think that's a reference to Godard as well, though.
Sorry, apologies, not Pepto-Bismol. He puts the Alka-Seltzer.
Yeah. It's almost like kind of two ways on. Because I think Taxi Driver is a reference to Godard, and then...
Oh, yeah.
And then that's cool. It's like rhyming.
Yeah, it's true. It's rhyming via Paul Schrader's mind.
The thing that I love about First Reformed as well is the way that you play with shadows in that movie and darkness and how that occupies the frame.
Yeah.
How do you kind of prepare for that in advance when, it's so specific to the room and the location itself?
Yeah, I always like to try to do a lighting test before start a movie. Just so, I work very closely with the colorist Tim Masick. Tim and I, through the past couple of years have sort of created a shorthand, and I like to present the director with an idea of what the film could look like. And so, I'll go in and just in a very basic, camera room, maybe like, for example, on First Reformed, the production designer gave me like a desk and a lamp that she was thinking about using. We sort of put those in a room in the camera checkout place that we do the camera checkout, and bring the gaffer in and the key grip if possible, and we'll just do lighting tests for a day. We'll show the references and start to think about what this film could look like. And out of that, then we go to the color suite and start to think about, here's an approach this way, here's an approach that way. Out of that comes some sort of product that you show the director and you say, is this feel right? Does this feel like the movie? And so, as you go into the movie, regardless of what space you enter, hey, I want to have, M90s bouncing off of, ultra bounce coming back through, another rag, whatever I want. Books, I want to create book lights. I want to create direct, go directly through grids, whatever it may be. You kind of get an understanding of these are my tools and this is how I use them. And shadow is a really important part of First Reformed, because when you're shooting digitally, Paul and I sort of developed this idea that we wanted to be able to see a lot in the frame. We were going to have long shots. We wanted a lot to be in focus. And so when you're shooting at such a deep stop, and need a lot of things in focus, the idea being that this would allow the audience to look at a bunch of different things and develop their own narrative and not be sort of spoon-fed to sort of lean into the movie.
The focus isn't pulling your eye straight to one thing.
Exactly. And as a result of that can feel very flat when you're shooting digitally. The sort of obsession I have with shape comes from that, from creating shape on digital, and being at a very high f-stop. These are all sort of ways that I figured out how to combat it and make an interesting image, regardless of the sort of flatness that we were attracted to.
When you're making a film like that, are you very aware of not going over that line where you're pushing the audience too far in one direction?
I think you are and you aren't. Ultimately, you're telling a story. And there's going to be shots in that story that lead an audience. They have to, right? And there's going to be shots in that story that hopefully provide the audience with a moment where they can sort of think for themselves. Whether the intention is to do so or not, it sort of all gets mixed up in the end.
And then with Dog Eat Dog, is that very much you just kind of, is that more like you're following the action and you're kind of trying to catch up to it? Is that what makes sense? Like, with the energy of that film.
I guess you could say so. I think that's a film where, you plan as much as you can and then you react. And so I think that, obviously, like, I knew that I was going to do the opening scene in all pink, but I didn't know that, scene 10 was going to be choreographed in that way, So you kind of have these set pieces and then you kind of fill the things in between it.
When you fill the things in, is that something that kind of just happens on set, or do you prep that out quite thoroughly before?
Yeah. You have to respond to what the actors are doing,
What kind of, look into the reference list of that, if you have a lot of those noir movies on it, what kind of made up the color palette in terms of references?
Oof, I don't know, man. I shot that in like 2015. honestly. I could look back at movies that we were watching, but yeah, I couldn't tell you.
Are you always very much looking forward? Like when we were talking earlier on about, your kind of development into this and your way that you went from anthropology, films into commercials, and it was such a natural progression. It feels like you kind of just moved from thing to thing quite very much in the present moment. Would that be a fair assessment? Or
sure. I mean, I think that's also just the nature of, you can only have so many images in your brain. You can only hold on to so many things, and be interested in so many things. I've just finished a movie, but then, I've got 3 commercials coming up, and each of them is a different approach. And, so much of that repetition that I'm already starting to forget what we did on the movie, obviously you remember things that you did and say, oh, I remember when I did this and I rigged the camera that way. And, you have your work professionalism with you. And you carry that, but in the same breath, you can't hold all those things, And I don't find myself rewatching my movies, or movies I've worked on.
I guess after a while, the things that are worth sticking around kind of just seep into your toolkit a little bit, do they?
Yeah, I think that's a good way. That's a good way of saying it. Like I learned I don't want to make another movie shooting on a red. I learned that maybe anamorphic glass is not really something that inspires me as much. These are all sort of lessons from Dog Eat Dog, and I put that in my back pocket, and but then again, then you come to a certain project and the references are Spielberg, and it just makes sense to bring anamorphic glass back. So, I think they're all different types of things, and they all go in the back of your brain somewhere. And listen, if I went back to my notes on Dog Eat Dog, I'm sure I could say, oh, we were watching, this movie and that movie, and referencing this noir and that noir. But ultimately, you only have so much space in your brain.
It's also maybe a reflection of the way the audience view it, where those references aren't as important when someone's just consuming it as a new, piece of art.
Yeah. I mean, that's the hope. I think Paul says steal, but steal around, and I think that sort of epitomizes the way that he makes movies, and the way that in a way, like I've been taught to make movies,
As long as you steal well.
Right. You steal well.
When you're stealing badly, you've got a problem.
There you go. Well, I mean, the hope is that you're stealing around, you're stealing interesting things, and they become something else, and the language becomes synonymous in your mind with the story and the script that you've been given.
We're all stealing, even if we don't realize it.
Yeah,
even
exactly.
We don't think we're stealing,
Yeah, I mean, it was all done until basically in 1935. Like that. It's all. You look back at classical Hollywood cinema, they did it all.
That's almost 100 years ago as well.
Yeah, that's true. It's crazy to think about that.
You wonder if there is going to be something like perhaps VR that kind of takes it in a new direction.
Maybe. I don't know. I mean, I think VR is a hard one, because they kind of have to figure out how to get rid of the goggles, for it to be. Until
it's a pair of sunglasses, it's not accessible, or contact lenses.
Exactly. It's immersive, but it's not immersive in a way that necessarily. And people are doing amazing things with the storytelling and all that. Right now it's just like 3D as opposed to something completely new.
But then again, I mean, if you look at like the first cell phones we had back in the 90s compared to what we're using now, like those massive, the brick ones.
Yeah.
They'll fade away eventually, and we'll get down to something more streamlined and efficient.
Right. Yeah, you're true. So, I'm sure the investments in it, and it will all become something. But, for now, I'm more interested in making, movies and TV as they are consumed and watched in its sort of more traditional sense.
Have you ever had a shot which you were uncertain about at the time, but then when you saw it on the big screen, you loved it?
I don't know. I mean, I think I'll answer that question very generally and just say that, like, I think that when you're making a movie and you're putting together any piece of that movie, you're uncertain about it. perhaps with years and years of experience, you will feel confident that this is the right choice. You just never actually really know. You can feel confident about it. You can think that it will cut. But ultimately, when the director gets in the room with the editor and they start to massage it and find it, you just don't know if it'll work. And that often will surprise me. There's been coverage of scenes that I've done that's, really movement heavy. And you sort of just know, well, is this going to make sense? Is this going to work? And then you see it and you're like, oh, that kind of works, So I would say that generally about most things.
You just have to trust in the process.
Yeah, you have to trust in the process and your ability and the vision of the director that they are pushing it in a way that makes sense.
Is that a given now? Or are you able to do that every time? Or are there ever times when that trust isn't fully there?
Sure, but then that's not a great relationship to have with your director.
We won't speak about those projects.
Yeah, let's not.